Good morning, everyone, and Grand Rising. My name is Reverend Dr. Alice Reid, and I am the spiritual leader here for Centers for Spiritual Living, Capistrano Valley, and we are so grateful to be here at the Baha'i Center, joining you every Sunday, almost every Sunday morning. We're really grateful for this beautiful space. And it's really good for me to be back. I was out of town last weekend. I was at a retreat. I went to Esalen for the first time. I had never been there. I've been hearing about this place since the 80s, but you know, I came up in Baltimore on the East Coast, and it was a haul to get across the country for a weekend retreat. But I was so happy to be there. I was actually attending a beautiful workshop. Actually, it was not a workshop because it was definitely a retreat. One of my very favorite mystics, modern day mystic, if you will, is Mirabai Starr. She's getting more popular. The first time I went to one of her retreats was in Omega on the East Coast, and there were 8 of us in the room. That was about 10 years ago. There were about 50 people there this weekend, and so it was still intimate and beautiful and refreshing, and it gave me all the things that I needed to get at the time and to do exactly what a retreat does. It gives us that opportunity to kind of step back from our lives and get in touch with the things that are important to us. Her retreat was on her book, Ordinary Mysticism. And the premise of her book is that the sacred is something that we can experience anywhere, anytime, with anyone. And so there was a lot of exploring the sacred in the mundane. And I definitely feel the pull when I don't set myself apart like that to get all wrapped up in what's going on in the world. But I do think that this philosophy and philosophies similar to it remind us that it's all sacred, that even in hardship, even in the places where we find that we're challenged, we can find some sacredness. And a case in point, one of my prayer partners, bless her heart, as she is experiencing some challenges, she tore her Achilles tendon. And, you know, she's going to be off of that leg completely for several months. She's interim minister, so she has to travel 2 weeks out of every month. She can't put any weight on it. She's finding herself finding the blessings in that. One of the things I know about this particular prayer partner is that she is a self-admitted skeptic. And oftentimes she finds it difficult to just trust people. And here she is in this experience where she really has to depend and trust on others. One of the congregants mentioned to her that she's in the biz as well, and one of the congregants mentioned to her, "Why, I can't believe you're taking this so lightly." And her response was, "Well, if I awfulize it, it's not going to change anything. It's just going to make it worse." So she shared this experience with me this morning about canoeing. She went on a float trip in a canoe where 2 people kind of did that fireman carry and carried her down to the water's edge and put her in the canoe, and she was able to canoe with the group for an hour and a half and float down the river. And then when they got to where they were, they picked her up again and carried her out. What a beautiful demonstration of just allowing herself to surrender to this experience. And I think it's healing as well. And I reminded her she'll probably heal faster than the doctors suggest. But that's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about spirituality and the ability for us to drop into the sacred no matter what. And so that's my practice right now. And so this month, as we follow the global themes that are offered by our international organization, we're talking about, all year we're talking about being open at the top, this idea that we are forever evolving and growing and going deeper, that our religion doesn't have some kind of end-all authority on spirituality, but that this spirituality and this philosophy and this path continues to grow and evolve as we create the opening for it. Beautiful, beautiful annual theme for us to be working with. And this month we're talking about divine doubt. Divine doubt. What a strange topic for religious scientists to be exploring. As I was listening to practitioner Faith's prayer, I have no doubt in my mind. And I thought, well, most times that's true. Most times that's true. This philosophy is definitely a philosophy that talks to us about the clarity that we can carry within our mind and in our heart that helps us to experience life at a more sacred level, if you will, at a more spiritual level, and into seeing past circumstances to what lies beneath the inherent fabric of life. And yet, there's this idea that doubt can be informative. Doubt can be part of our spiritual practice. That when we have an experience of doubt, it's not because our faith is failing. It's because something is calling us to a deeper realization, a deeper truth, a deeper understanding. And so as I talk about this topic, and of course we're looking at the collective doubt, I think I need to mention the obvious, that we're swimming right now in a world where there might be a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty about the future, uncertainty about security, uncertainty about people we see who are suffering in the world. Certainly, we can't ignore that, right? We can't ignore the things that are challenging us in our world as we look about and see all the happenings that are happening. The news is relentless. We can't avoid it. And, you know, there might be someone in this room, perhaps many of you in this room, who, when you give an honest look at what's happening in the world, you might have some concerns when you hear a practitioner talk about wholeness, perfection, and completeness, right? It may be like, but wait, wait, there's this war in Iran, and there's this devastation happening, and there's this suffering happening. How can everything be whole, perfect, and complete? It's a great question. And I'm not here to answer it for you. But I am here to encourage you to allow yourself to ask that question of your own self, to ask that question of your own faith, to begin to look at life from a different perspective. Now, I know that many of us have a deep understanding of our philosophy in this path, that anything that we experience, any condition, any experience, any hardship, any joy, all of it's temporary. That everything that is experienced in life drops us into a temporary experience of the human condition, and it'll change. Sometimes you'll get more of something you enjoy, sometimes you'll get more of something you're not enjoying, like my dear friend who tore her Achilles tendon. But this deeper truth of life, that this is temporary, doesn't assuage our doubt. But it does give us an opportunity to tease out those places where we may have questions, where we may want to dive a little deeper. Because what I want you to know about doubt is it doesn't just disappear when you do an affirmation. It goes underground. It goes underground into your subjective. It goes underground to integrate itself with your beliefs. And when you do have divine doubt, when you do have this opportunity to lean into a question or an inquiry, it really is an invitation. And so what I've come to you today is with a couple of stories. The first thing that came to mind for me is a beautiful poem that D.H. Lawrence wrote in the beginning of the 19th century called "The Song of a Man Has Come Through." And at the end of the poem, one of the most famous stanzas, he writes about strange angels. What is the knocking? What is the knocking at the door in the night? It is somebody wants to do us harm? No, no. It is the three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. And the three strange angels that Lawrence is talking about in this beautiful poem, in this little stanza here, is he's talking about sudden inspiration. He's talking about the unconscious mind, that the unexpected spiritual visitation that sometimes can frighten us because it's asking us to change. It's asking us to think a new thought. It's asking us to consider something that might be different than what we've been holding. And I think that doubt is one of those strange angels. It's one of those invitations for us to not be frightened about, but to invite in and to embrace. It's a doorway rather than something that's going to be doing harm to us. And case in point, this very gathering of Centers for Spiritual Living in Capistrano Valley came about because of one woman's doubt. It was the late 1800s, and Emma Curtis Hopkins was in the inner circle of Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of that movement, and she was her right-hand woman, the editor of the Christian Science Journal, and Mary Baker Eddy was busy establishing this unique revelation that she had had about Christian Science, about the power of prayer and the scientific method of prayer that caused and created healing in people's lives. And it was really catching on, and she was doing so well with it. And Emma began to question if Mary Baker Eddy's unique revelation was truly all that unique. And Emma began to see some of the basic truth that was being filtered through Christian Science in other ancient teachings and in other authors. And she began to read other people, and she began to question. And Mary Baker Eddy felt very betrayed by this. So in 1885, Emma was fired. She was given the heave-ho, shown the door. And for those of you who are familiar with the New Thought history, the very thing that created this movement, Emma became the teacher of teachers. She taught Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who founded Unity. She taught some of the founders of divine science. And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, she taught this young man who was very inquisitive and very curious and very precocious. His name was Ernest Holmes. And he went on to write the book, The Science of Mind, and found a movement called Religious Science, which we know today as Centers for Spiritual Living. And all of this transpired because Emma was curious, because she was open to the strange angel that was knocking at her door, because she was willing not to be certain about some things. She was willing to be certain about the truth that she was working with with Mary Baker Eddy, but she was also willing to explore other avenues of that truth. And so that is the invitation. That's the kind of potency that doubt can invite into our lives when it pops up its little head and you begin to question things. You begin to wonder. Now, to be clear, this teaching that you are in is not about accepting things wholesale. I expect you to question everything you hear. I expect you to dive deep. I expect you to make it your own. I expect you to look at the things that you believe and the things that resonate with you, and I expect you to reject or to let go of or to go beneath the things that you aren't agreeing with. I remember hearing that from my teacher, and I remember thinking that was quite refreshing, because every other religious teacher, every other spiritual teacher that I had studied up until that point told me I had to believe like they did. They told me that if I didn't go deep with their particular philosophy, that I wasn't going to get where I wanted to go. Now, I can imagine that sometimes going along to get along may be more comfortable. Just agreeing to agree. But if you're here as a spiritual seeker, and I like to say a spiritual finder, if you're here as a spiritual finder, I expect you to lean into those places that invite you in, even the places that are uncomfortable, the places that might seem like strange angels. And as a collective, as a Centers for Spiritual Living, in our philosophy, I have been to so many meetings with colleagues, and it's a little like herding cats. Because we are what's the term? We are conscious creators, meaning that we are individuals who think for ourselves. It makes for interesting board meetings, don't you think? When people think for themselves. And it's not always comfortable, but it's that opportunity to tease out a greater good. And to be clear, I am not suggesting that you manufacture doubt. You don't have to go out and create it. What I think about sometimes about questions is sometimes our ego, maybe I won't talk about you, I'll talk about me. Sometimes my ego can start to feel pretty clever because I've come up with a clever question. But the doubt that I'm talking about leaning into is that doubt that is subtly drawing us to some question that we want to know more about. Something that the unconscious and the conscious come together in a question. And when we do that, it shifts the landscape. And the late 90s, I was working for an international nonprofit. It was a startup on youth development internationally. They were doing some pretty amazing work, and we had a strategic planning retreat. And the people that I was in the room with were big thinkers. There were amazing ideas that came by. The flip charts were full. There were things all over the wall, and we were all excited about what we were going to be doing. And as the retreat was coming to an end, we were going around the room, and the vibe was like palatable, and everybody was really excited. And I had this question in my mind. How are we going to get from where we are to where we say we want to be? And I almost didn't ask the question. I was afraid, I didn't want to not belong. I didn't want to rain on anybody's parade. But when it came my turn to do some reflection, I asked that question. I said, how are we going to make sure these beautiful ideas come forward? And there was a little pause. I could feel the energy like, whoop. But then people got it. And I could see that some people were thinking that too. They had that same concern that these ideas were so big and beautiful. How are we going to make sure that they happened? And so we began to create an accountability plan, and we created a team that was responsible for the different initiatives. And that organization went from a startup organization to an organization that has impact around the world because we made that leap together. Leadership became more collaborative. Positions changed. I'm not taking credit for that question. That question came from the divine because they were doing beautiful work, and it needed to be asked. And if I hadn't have asked it, I imagine someone else would have. And that's how divine doubt can feed us. That's how divine doubt can bring us along to move the process of the creative out into expression by means of each one of us. I think, I was thinking about this idea of collective curiosity and divine doubt, and I was reminded of the guy in the fable who finally said, "He ain't got any clothes on." I'm, of course, referring to the emperor has no clothes. Like, everybody knew it, but nobody was brave enough to say it. And so as I want to suggest that the doubts that you might be carrying, the little nigglies that come up for you, are at least a dozen other people are having the same doubts. At least crossing their mind from time to time. And what I know about this community is because we're a safe community that we can hold you. We can carry you as a community and as a collective as you dive into your doubts, as you ask your questions. What a beautiful opportunity to have a place where you can do that. To wonder, to be curious, to explore your doubts and to see what's underneath them. Our affirmation this week says it all. I share the power and potential of collective curiosity. It doesn't say, I have all the answers. It doesn't say, I am certain. That affirmation is about sharing the potential for collective curiosity. So my invitation to you this week is that when you find yourself in conversation and somebody says something that you don't agree with, I'm going to invite you to pause and to tap into what is it underneath your disagreement, to actually go into curiosity and inquiry as opposed to argument, to see what it is that might be popping up for you. You might even want to journal about it or sit with something that's nagging you. Who knows? It might just be a strange angel. Thank you very much. So let's take that into our affirmative prayer time. And I invite you to lower your gaze or close your eyes. And to be in that beautiful place where everything is created, where the divine loves life so much that it gives all of itself to life. And so I know for each one that we allow ourselves to invite the possibilities, to invite the doubts, to invite what it is within us that is calling us forward to continue to grow and evolve, to continue to experience that expression of the divine as only it can express as each one. And in this moment of recognition that the divine is creating itself over and over again in a multiplicity of ways, I invite each one to silently acknowledge that each one is the divine in all its magnificence and perfection and messiness and uncertainty and doubt. That the free will of our thoughts and ideas, our passions, our heartbreak, all of it is used by the divine. Everything is an opportunity and an invitation to see the sacred, to be the sacred in our ordinary lives. And trusting that this process of the divine expressing itself in so many ways is just the greater and greater opportunities to experience love, to experience joy, to experience peace and wholeness where we couldn't see it before. And so I know for each one that we continue to tease out, to explore, to discover, to let go of, to surrender, and know that the end result, the end product of being open-minded like that and open-hearted, it is the gateway to greater and greater good. And in celebrating that, we anchor this together by saying, and so it is.